God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Lynn Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. Our subtext is Let My Business Go, and we'll have guests from around the world. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. So welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My guest today is Cobus Visagie, which is a hard thing to say if you're not from South Africa. But that's probably the least of your problems nowadays. Cobus is getting people to pronounce your name. Cobus is the CEO of African Merchant Capital, and they do a whole wealth of financial services, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. But right now, Cobus is sitting in the hub of the financial world in the UK, and so based out of London. Cobus, with the crisis, everything that we've seen, firstly, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Greatly appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And I wanted to ask Cobus, what are you seeing in terms of a response in the UK from people generally, and particularly from people of faith?
Well, I think I think the way that the UK have approached this lockdown has been one similar to have a similar mindset as the responses in the war, in the Second World War. And I think because there are such a broad understanding, if I can compare that to, say, a place like South Africa, and I would say the whole of Africa that wasn't really doesn't have such a national event in the history and something that they celebrate every year. If you look at my children, spread over ages from 16 to 11, and having followed their school career, that I think having a community response to hardship is actually a very biblical and a very it is what is required in times like this. Now, I would admit that I do think that in poorer areas in Britain, you probably will not have that to such an extent. But I would say in every way, in this society that we are living here, there's a lot of courtesy being shown, especially towards older people, to vulnerable people. I see everywhere in neighborhoods there are food collection points. I'm in a larger road. Our road here is probably about 48 houses, where we're in a group where everybody immediately offered to do shopping for the elderly residents, etc., etc. So there was a lot of. I don't think I would have met as many people. I've just moved into this house about 6 months ago. I wouldn't have met and started communicating with so many people and understand people's circumstances. So people would say, John at number 43, would like to do some shopping or need some help in the garden or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, it's been really positive. It's obviously also a time where I think circumstances like this, and it's well documented, and it's the same here, where we realize actually who are the people that are most needed in society. The social workers, doctors, nurses, especially. And I think from that perspective, it's also a good reset for society.
So you're in the financial services arena. Do people think you're essential services, or not so much?
No. Look, it's part of that. I mean, we are alternative. I think that is one of the problems at the moment, is that although the banks are seen as essential services, and the government supported the major banks to deploy these emergency loans, alternative finance providers like ourselves are not. I think it's also a bigger problem where we have got a couple of situations like that, in that we are not banking with a British bank at the moment. We're banking with a Mauritian bank and another African bank. So we, for instance, as a business, don't have the assistance from British high street banks. So that's an interesting phenomenon that, if you have been funded by alternative funding sources, you would struggle to get the support required. Another thing from a global society is that the lease that we have in the city is with a Swiss-based fund, and so they don't have the support from a British bank. In the case of a lease negotiation, and maybe a lease, some relief on the lease for the quarter, for example. So there's some dislocation in the market to support a national effort of general finance and cash flow relief.
Cobus, do you think then that this kind of phenomenon is going to push people to thinking more locally? Are they going to be thinking, okay, I want to work closer to home, I want to bank closer to home, I want to be more invested in my local national entities than being more global?
I think it's a very I would say that I am somebody that would generally I've always, because my area of focus is the sub-Saharan African markets. It is, for instance, one of the areas that I've always evangelized in the market, is that the African markets, for example, needs their pension funds and the insurance industry to invest in their own markets and to be much better positioned to support major infrastructure projects, especially from a debt perspective, because it's so risky, and to put dollar, euro, or any foreign currency debt into long-term infrastructure projects in developing countries.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm always one that says that we should look at our own national interests, and I'm talking about now even individual countries in Africa. Mm-hmm. But the what moves the needle in Europe is very, very significant from an African perspective, as an example, and what is very significant in Africa is minuscule from a global US or European point of view.
Yeah.
So I think cross-border transactions is going to become difficult. We have got the major question at the moment where we are advising on quite substantial transactions across sub-Saharan Africa, to ask the question, when, like they would say in Africa, you have to go and kick the tires.
Mm-hmm.
So when is an investor going to be able to go and kick the tires?
Right.
We're sitting, for instance, in an example at the moment where we have got a term sheet for quite a substantial transaction in the agricultural industry in Malawi. Malawi hasn't gone into lockdown at all. And for all the right reasons. It's impossible for those people, sitting in absolutely dire circumstances, to be locked into a little shed. But saying that, so when will myself or a Dutch consultant or a South African consultant be allowed to travel into Malawi?
Yeah.
And how long would the quarantine be, and what it will be the circumstance for that person to return to wherever they will go back to? What will be the cost for that, to use that independent DD consultant in a case like that, right, to pay for that person also while they're sitting in quarantine?
Yeah.
And, do you want to, we have got clients in Nigeria. Are you going to go and get stuck in Nigeria in quarantine? That's a little difference from sitting in your home in Hertfordshire in the UK. So that's a very tough one. And, across the board, both the banks that we deal with, as well as in the UK, the people that I've spoken to, is basically, I think for the next 6 months, you are just going to see both banks and funds focusing on their hospital lists. I think it's 99% of the effort will go into the hospitals.
Yeah, yeah. And by that you mean the current situations where they have a position, they're invested or whatever, and there's a problem.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. I was chatting to somebody from Mauritius the other day who said that he lives there, based there, thinks that it's going to take about 18 months for their tourism to recover. It's a big industry, obviously, apart from financial services. So do you see a difference in the response from the African countries? You've kind of alluded to it, or
Yeah, definitely. And there's a case, especially for outside of South Africa, where those who believe in the Africa story, and I mean, it is a two-edged sword, is that Africa has got the demographic dividend in its favor. And if you go and look at more than 93% of people dying of this disease is over the age of 50 years old. And, if the median age of Africans are far below 50, and in some countries, even as low as the 20s, the risk is lower. There are other thoughts as well around, access to heat, the sun, vitamin D. There's lots of things that people say. Why is it not an issue in certain African countries? That question hasn't been answered yet. But what is known is that Africa's demographic dividend and the health situation from that perspective is counting in its favor. Now, we haven't seen the issues around immunity issues, specifically from HIV/AIDS in countries like South Africa. But that there are the question marks around that as well. Mm-hmm. So am I going to judge the president of Malawi or Tanzania not putting their citizens in lockdown? No, I won't, because I think it's practically impossible, and it would be very callous from a perspective of just food security. Mm-hmm. And safety of people. You must also remember that a number of these countries are going also into elections this year, which is another consideration. And obviously, factual base, I do think that it would be much better for that country to, one, spend that same amount of money. I would rather say, instead of taking the hit on your GDP, go and build extra hospitals. Yeah. Put the money into your old age homes and make masks available and hand sanitizer and limit large public gatherings.
Yeah, right.
But I think the problem, the larger problem that will need to be solved is these countries can also, like I said, they all depend on foreign direct investment.
Right.
And if there will need to be some concession for inward travel in one way or the other by foreign nationals into these countries, and not make it prohibitive for them to travel into the countries, to allow FDI to flow into these economies.
Right. Yeah. Now, you've seen a bit of a shaking in the financial services world. Is it your view that it needed a shakeup? I mean, it's not your fault, but do you think it needed a shakeup? It was ready for a shakeup?
I think it is very difficult to, we all want to change things in this world, but I do think that if I speak from the perspective of the Davids that need to fight against the Goliath in the financial world, I do think that if I look at something like trade finance or large-scale project finance, mm-hmm. is that the major banks that are sitting on significant liquidity globally have grown to such an extent that smaller projects that sometimes more required in a larger number are just overlooked. and is struggling to get finance. Also, there's a dichotomy between the size of projects in the first world versus the developing world, and there is very few players in that market in between. So possibly at that level, I believe that this could be a good shakeup. One of the ways which the system is getting rid of the smaller mid-market players is just very onerous compliance, governance that have been brought in. Now, it's got all its good aspects to it,
right,
but it is so onerous now that your smaller player struggle to put a cost-effective and a profitable offering on the table. That's also affordable in the markets compared to the larger players, because the larger players can afford a 200 people compliance team. If you want to put it that way.
Right.
So I think from that perspective, and I'm not sure if there's going to be a rewind on that from that perspective, but I do think that the market is going to demand financial services providers at local level that will be available even at times like these, when there's possibly a global lockdown.
Yeah. One of the commentaries I'd heard in the past, Cobus, was, you've obviously seen activities of countries from Asia in Africa, and particularly the investments of the Chinese in infrastructure projects, mega projects, and so on. Do you think this is going to tilt Africa more towards China, or more towards we've got to have our own local banks? Do you see any indicators there?
Well, I think the populist democratic sentiment. So I would say the majority of the populations of most of sub-Saharan Africa, if I can say it that way, would prefer not to be financed by China for many reasons. If I can just put it that way, it is not popular even for governments to be seen to work with the Chinese at the moment. And one of the major reasons is that the Chinese companies do not employ African workers in the projects that they don't employ them during the project development, and they don't employ them for running a project or a business, like say Zambian mines or wherever you go into Africa, the projects. So that is problematic. It doesn't address those issues. So it's mainly the governments that reach out for Chinese funds.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is at a cost of votes. Saying that, I am of the opinion that the Chinese have played a major role of making Africa attractive again. To the global community during the past 10 to 15 years. Donald Trump and the US government has started major new initiatives to compete with the Chinese in Africa. And so is the Japanese and the Koreans, even the British and the Europeans have woken up because, again, of the very onerous governance that is required and has had a lot of issues in Africa in the past, has made the process to draw funds into projects in Africa, worse than pulling teeth. And we're talking about 7 to 10 years to draw funds from European and US financial institutions. It is, and that is why it's taken so long. The Chinese make certain commercial concessions, and they build the bridge, and it's done 2 years later. Now, there are questions about the quality of the bridge at times, but it was done fast, and everybody's traveling, both the citizens as well as businesses, trucks and trains, everything is going over that bridge, and it's locked up the market. And so there is a very fine line between the pros and cons of that, and I think that trend will continue. In certain cases, African governments and businesses will take a view that this will take too long for a European or a US development finance institution to drag its feet to do the transaction, and you'll rather make your bet with the Chinese, who will move much faster on something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are benefits to that as well.
Yeah. Now, you have a long-term passion for Africa. You're having a decades-long view for Africa, right? So you believe the African story, as you say. You're from Africa. You're living in the UK, but you have that long-term view. Mm-hmm. As you've contemplated, I mean, you started your business, I assume, because you had a view to changing Africa for the better over the decades. How's your view of the future been impacted? Are you more determined? Do you see new opportunities coming out of this? And to what extent have you had to struggle with, okay, God, you got me into this business, but here we are. How much has that been a challenge for you?
I think on this journey, Brett, I feel a bit more, I would say it's more a Joseph journey than a Moses journey, in the sense that I don't think Joseph had a dream, but along the way, you're being thrown in the pit and you're thrown in the jail and people are putting you this way and that way. You're not sure why you're away from your family and you're just trying to be faithful, along the way. And there are times that God elevates you to very significant positions, and there's others that you feel, what is the significance of doing this, or do anybody really care here? Where I would say compared to a Moses, and maybe a Daniel as well. Daniel had a vision that I think Daniel from the start, a vision that he's going to, he's preparing the way, both physically and in the spiritual, for the reestablishment of Jerusalem and the coming of Christ. And Moses had the vision of he's going to go somewhere. He's taking the people out of captivity and they're taking them to the promised land. And they started getting a view, and unfortunately didn't go in there. But so from my perspective, I've given up on trying to have the full picture, but I do believe that God can shine the light on the next steps as we go along. And I'm very much a business plan B kind of mindset, that you gotta, and that probably comes from my sporting background as well. You gotta have plan B and plan C and plan D there, because everybody, your opponents have seen it, the devil has seen it, everybody has seen the plans. And I think we need to be ready. And, for me, it's sometimes the same as, public speaking, or when you have a preach. Sometimes you have to be able to be open to go and stand behind the pulpit and say, okay, actually, what I prepared wasn't what I should share now.
Yeah.
And you should have the confidence to preach something else, or to say something else according to what's coming up in your mind. But I do think there's a general compass that the role that we are fulfilling in the market is to fill that dichotomy, the mid-market. So I do think there are institutions and charities and development finance institutions set up for your smaller SMEs, and there is a very established global financial services market for the larger national champions and your multinationals operating within the market. And we want to fill that mid-market and draw funds and capital and resources into that midsection of the market. Yeah. Now, I think at this stage of my career and where we are, I believe that a major part that's missing, but at this stage, for instance, I've got no appetite for it to be politically involved. So I would say that I'm very apolitical, and I do not take political parts into any of the countries that we're involved in. And I do suspect that at one stage, God will ask me to go and speak to that mountain as well. But to be very honest with you, and you have got experience as well, that I've got no desire at this stage. Actually, it's something that I would rather ask that the bucket would pass me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like your idea about just saying, what's the play in front of you? What's the situation right now in front of you? And almost deciding to suspend a strategic plan and just say, okay, what's the Father doing? What's the next thing to do? And to get on. But also to not lose courage, right? Because you can easily lose courage in sub-Saharan Africa. So what have you done to encourage yourself in this season? Do you have any particular things that you personally do to keep Cobus encouraged?
Maybe before I answer that, I just want to say that I do think that in each one of our journeys, one of the things that I have realized is, my firm is only 8 years old, and that's very young to be really punching above your weight and expect businesses that have been established for a long time with considerable size to partner with you. Because everybody, doesn't matter if you're a Christian or non-Christian, even people who know me well, want to see how you do business and how you work it out. And sometimes you need to be patient in how you're growing. There was a time when everybody was smacking Israel around and he was nobody. But then there came a time when everybody wanted to be David and Solomon's friend. Where and they effectively built the temple, on top of that relationships. And I many times see it that way as well. There's that we need to build up a good name in the market, and it takes time, and you need to have patience in that. Well, I would say, I'm very fortunate that the people that I started this business with are, I've got a Christian business partner, and sometimes it just feels like we're crying on each other's shoulders but what I found is as well, and obviously I've got a very faithful and great wife, and I just think across the board, and I'm also plugged into a number of other relationships, which is something that I was encouraged with, my entire life since I became a Christian. But I just find that it's very rare that you and your good Christian friends are low at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the fortunate things, and I also there was something that I remember that when I became a Christian, or when I really had my conversion experience and got saved in 1997. I almost 6 months later, I got into the professional rugby really kicked off, and I started traveling. So immediately I was taken out of church environment, and I had to learn to just seek the Holy Spirit for myself. I need to seek God to understand the Bible and to deal under these circumstances. And the Holy Spirit gave me a promise that if I reach out and encourage other people, He will encourage me. If I reach out and teach other people, He will teach me. And I think I've been following that same thing. So I'm trying to encourage other entrepreneurs. The moment I try to reach out and want to pray for every single thing in my business and everything that needs prayer for, there's always something in me that kicks in and say, but let's me pray and trust that somebody else will be praying for me.
Yeah.
But I'm going to pray for the other guy's business. I'm going to pray for the other guy's sick child or father who's having a heart operation or whatever it may be. And I think that is an encouragement within myself, and trusting that God would kind of not get the phone lines crossed and know where where it should go. But it's a real encouragement for anybody that's listening to this. I think the moment you start feeling really down, just start praying for other people. The moment you feel like you've prayed too much for yourself, maybe you have prayed too much for yourself, and pray for somebody else. And trust God.
We had a couple of guys in South Africa that went through a consultation together. Marius Dazel, who was a fruit exporter, and a guy, Richard Motsi from Zimbabwe, who was a graphic artist. I mean, they had nothing in common, and yet the two of them got friendly, and they got together every week, and they prayed for each other's business. That was the rule. They wouldn't pray for their own. They would just pray for the other guy. And over a period of time, things lifted. I bumped into Marius at the airport a few years ago, and he said, those things that were prayed for my business back then. It took 5 or 7 years for them to come to pass, but they all came to pass. And part of the cornerstone was him and Richard praying for each other's businesses. So I love that. I think it's, get your eyes off yourself, pray for somebody else. It's better to give than receive. This is a practical way, to encourage somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same. I've learned that from the rugby, They asked me once, how can a Christian be, hit other people so hard? I said, because the Bible says it's better to give than to receive.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So you see a lot of analogies between your rugby career and your financial services career, and certainly doing business in sub-Saharan Africa, you must take a few hits every week.
Yeah, no, it's get hit and get up and move on. But there is something like momentum as well. You can never discount momentum. I think that's the hard part. The flywheel, to get the flywheel going and the momentum.
Yeah,
it's always a tough thing. And also, I think it's also a relational part. Like I said before, I think the biggest mistake that I've made, and something that I had to learn, is just to be patient with people.
Yeah.
People take time to get to know you. People need to check you out. People need to see how you behave.
Yeah.
Even I, as a Christian, the moment somebody else tells me they're a Christian businessman, then I make even more time to get to know them and see what their behavior is like.
Yeah.
And so we should expect that other people are not just going to respond to you, even though you think you are very upright and a good guy with a good intention. Unfortunately, the world has made people very cynical and skeptical, especially if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of our duty that we need to stick to it and to be consistent in our testimony and our relationship, so that it is a testimony for people to say, that guy is different, his business is different, and it's nice actually to be a little bit of a anomaly for people, that they struggle to really place you.
Yeah. Well, for the people who are listening to this, and when you look at your pulling that we have to the marketplace, any final thoughts in terms of, at this particular season, any advice that you would have for somebody who's out there with a business that might be struggling or going through a pivot, going through an adjustment?
Yeah, I think that, if I wouldn't say that I know everything. I think if you're in real trouble, if your business is in real difficulty, don't rack up debt now. Just be upfront with everybody around you. Cut back as much as you can, but do not get further indebted in any way.
Yeah.
And I would say, moving forward, I do think you need to review your business plan.
Yeah.
Get out the business plan, G and H, and really think through what you're going to do the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And keep your 5-year plan next to it, but focus on the next 6 months of how you're going to get through it, and how the new normal may influence you. Make some scenarios, if you're not going to be able to travel for 6 months, to do a scenario analysis. If you're not going to have face-to-face contact with your clients, what will be that circumstances. So everything is going to change. I don't think people are going to book a flight again more than 6 months in advance. I'm not sure if there's going to be any insurance. This pandemic can go back and you'll not have any insurance to get your flights, your hotel, or the conference booking that you had in place done. So nobody knows how that's going to happen. And so how are you going to do this different? And but fortunately, this is not a localized issue. It's a global issue. And if you make these, if you can make innovative changes to your business plan, your customers, your suppliers, your lenders, everybody will, I think, applaud you and try and work with those plans. Plans that would 3 months ago, somebody would say, "You're crazy. What are you doing? No, go away." I think people will give that a second thought now. And so it may be a stepping stone for many people in these circumstances. And I trust that you must also see it from a perspective. Let's just say you sat at the moment, as an investment firm with 20 firms in trouble at the moment. It will take you the next 2 to 3 years to work it out, as opposed to if you start an investment firm now or a new company or whatever, you can start from scratch and you don't have legacy debt or non-performance or anything else that you have to deal with. So there are more than one way to have a look at this.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Cobus, thanks for sharing your thoughts. Greatly appreciated. Always good chatting with you. And
thank you, Brett.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, and we look forward to having you on a future podcast. So this is the Repurposing Business Podcast. You can go to brettjohnson.biz and find future issues, past issues. We've been chatting with Cobus Visagie, the CEO of African Merchant Capital, soon to be a global leader in the mid-market space that nobody else wants to operate in. Thank you, Cobus. Great to have you on the call. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brett. Stay safe.